everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has been 5 weeks since we gave birth and we've had a beautiful little boy called Jude. He's our second. We've already got a 2.5-year-old called Josh. And we're starting to settle in a little bit, so I thought today might be a nice opportunity to talk a little bit about the birth and our experience of giving birth in a hospital in the UK. I know that when I was pregnant, I loved watching these videos just so I had a bit more of an idea of what to expect. Obviously everyone's experience is different, but I have now done this twice in the same hospital and each time was a little bit different. My baby is just sleeping, so I may have to get up if he starts to cry. We will see. So, Jude's due date was the 29th of December and that was nervously close to Christmas. I didn't really want him to come on Christmas because I wanted to spend Christmas Day with my other son, Josh, and I didn't really want his birthday to be on Christmas. So that week before Christmas, I was doing everything I could to try and get him out, bouncing on the ball, eating pineapple, doing curb walking. And then it got to about the 23rd of December and I was like, right, you are not coming out now, stay put for a few days, wait till Boxing Day. But that wasn't how it worked. So on Christmas Eve at about 1:30 in the morning, I woke up because I started to have cramps. And then I realised that these cramps were actually quite regular and they were happening every few minutes. And I realised they were probably contractions. And they were worse when I was lying down, so I actually ended up having to get up. And that was when my day started at 1:30 in the morning on Christmas Day morning. So I realised then that I was probably going to be having a Christmas Day baby because my first came reasonably quickly for a first baby. I think I was fully dilated in about 6 hours. However, with my first baby, my waters broke at night and that was the first thing that happened. My waters didn't break this early this time, the contractions were the first thing that happened. So I got up and went downstairs and started to bounce my ball and watch TV. And my contractions were quite irregular at this point, but happening sort of every few minutes, maybe every 5 minutes or so. And they were manageable. I didn't really have to do much breathing, but they were painful, like really bad period cramps. Too painful to sleep through. I did think I should try and go back to bed, and I tried to go back to bed a couple of times so that I could get some sleep, but it wasn't happening. They were actually worse when I was lying down. And then at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I got my husband up and told him about it because I thought they were getting worse. The last time I was pregnant, the first time, I did do like an online hypnobirthing course, which I didn't remember much of, but I quickly looked up the breathing again a few weeks before I was due. So I was using that to help me with the contractions. Conveniently, once I got my husband up, they actually got better again and more sporadically spread apart. So I got him up for no reason. But we had a nice Christmas morning before Josh got up and we opened our presents from each other and had breakfast and really chilled a couple of hours before we got my son out of bed. And we actually ended up having a really nice Christmas morning. We did all the things that I wanted to do with my son. So we checked his stocking and we checked the carrots and the mince pies to see if Santa had had them. So we opened his presents and played with them. And I was able to kind of make Christmas morning somewhat normal for a couple of hours. Every 5 minutes or so, I go off to my yoga ball and breathe through my contractions and not talk to anybody. But then between contractions, I was able to act normal and spend some time with my son and my husband on Christmas morning, which was lovely. However, it got to about 10:30 in the morning and my contractions were getting closer together. They were a couple of minutes apart and they were getting a lot more painful. So I rang the hospital and they said that because it was my second birth, it might be a good idea to come in because second births can be a lot quicker. So I rang my dad, who was on standby, and he came round and took Josh back to his house for the rest of Christmas Day. Having a baby on Christmas Day is actually pretty special because the hospital is very quiet. There's no one else there really apart from the staff. And you're made to feel a little bit special because it's Christmas Day and everyone's in a good mood. So as much as I didn't want it to happen, it was actually quite nice. We went into the hospital, we didn't have to wait at all. I got checked straight away and they said that I was 4 centimetres dilated and that because my contractions were quite regular, I should stay. And they did a quick sweep because my waters hadn't broken yet. I was fully effaced, but they thought a sweep might speed it along, so we did that. And because I was fully effaced and 4 centimetres dilated, I was quite nervous about having a sweep because I'd heard they were painful, but this wasn't painful at all, so that was good. And then they admitted us and we got into our room straight away. At that point I was managing the contractions quite well, just with my breathing. I was scared to do the pushing part and the contractions towards the end when they get a lot more intense by myself without pain relief. So I let them know that I probably would want an epidural, and we got the gas and air ready, which I got straight away. And in my first birth, I was in the waiting room for ages without anything before I got the room, and I was vomiting and it was awful. But this time I was able to get the gas and air pretty much straight away, and it actually really helped me control my contractions. I didn't feel like it did much the first time round, but I don't know whether the mask was slightly different this time that I was breathing into, and maybe I just breathed it in better and knew how to do it. But I definitely felt like it took the edge off. At this point it was probably around 12 o'clock, lunchtime. Giving birth in the UK, they take you to your private room while you're in labour, and it has your own bathroom and toilet as well, so that was good. And actually while I was using the toilet, my waters broke during a really strong contraction. So that was when the contractions picked up a bit. You have a midwife that's in there pretty much the whole time, and being Christmas Day there was a lot more staff than there was people. I think there was one other woman giving birth, but they don't have any induction scheduled, they don't have any C-section scheduled, so it was just us two women and then quite a lot of staff. They have to have a minimum amount of staff. So we had a midwife in there the whole time, and we had other staff coming in and checking. They hook you up so that they can see your heart rate and the baby's heart rate, and so they can measure your contractions as well. So I had that thing hooked to my finger. So after my waters broke, they checked me again to see how far along I was, and I was 6 centimetres dilated. And then within an hour or so, my contractions were pretty much back to back. They were definitely like a minute apart, and sometimes they were finishing and then another one would start straight after, which was fun. So I was thinking that I was probably getting close to the end. And even though I felt okay, I've always been really nervous about the last part of labour. So I asked for the epidural, and during my first labour, when I was pregnant with Josh, it took 4 hours for my epidural to actually come after I asked for it, because the anaesthetist wasn't available. But this time it came straight away, so that was a lovely surprise. And I found having the epidural put in absolutely fine. The hardest part is staying still when you're having quite intense contractions and they're so close together. But the actual needle going into the spine, I barely felt that at all. People say it feels like a bee sting. I've never been stung by a bee, but I would think that that would be more painful. It felt like something really cold going into your back once they start to put the drugs in. So it took about half an hour before the effects of it started to work, and I had the little button that I could press so I could administer more of the drug if I was feeling more pain. I think you can press it every half an hour or so. And that pretty much got rid of all my pain from the contractions. At first I could feel the pressure still, but I couldn't feel any pain, so that was great. And I did press it pretty much at every opportunity because I felt like I was getting to the end, and like I said, I was scared of that part. And by the time I got to the end, so I think I got checked again maybe 2 hours later, and by that point I was 10 centimetres and I was ready to go, but they did want us to wait another hour before I started to push. And this was just a really chill time. I couldn't feel my contractions at all. I would look over to the machine and I'd be like, oh, that's a big one. It's 120, which was like off the charts, but I couldn't feel it, so I was able to just talk to my husband, look on my phone and just relax really. So that was really nice. At this point, once you've got your epidural, you can't go to the toilet anymore because your legs do get very numb. So I did have to have a catheter fitted, but again, I didn't feel that. And even though I had the epidural, I could still move my legs a bit, and I was able to sit up. I didn't really want to be lying down, so I was able to sit up more straight, and I could move a little bit, but obviously on the bed. So then we were ready to push. The midwife swapped at this point, so I had a different midwife. This was probably the hardest part. I couldn't feel any pain, but because I had literally pressed the button on my epidural just before we started to push, which they're not supposed to do, I didn't realise that. I really couldn't feel anything, so I couldn't feel my contractions, and I was completely reliant on the midwife telling me when to push, which made it more difficult. And I'd say we were probably pushing for maybe like 45 minutes, an hour. And my contractions were quite slow. They had slowed down a bit because of the epidural. And I was worried because in my first pregnancy that happened and I had to go on the hormone drip to increase them again. But this time it was okay. I was having to push with everything I had. She kept telling me to push harder. And I was really, really trying, but it was quite hard because I couldn't feel anything. So that's definitely a downside to the epidural. And it felt like I was pushing and pushing, but nothing was really happening. Eventually, the head did come out. And then it was a little bit of time. The midwife had to press the button because the shoulder did get stuck. It was okay. Lots of people rushed in, which made it a bit scary. But then they did a maneuver and the baby was out. The shoulders were out in the next push, so it was fine. And then finally he was out. He did look a little pale, which was a little bit worrying, and it took a couple of minutes for him to cry, which is always a bit nerve-wracking, but it was the same with my first as well. So I did think everything was going to be okay. And then he was fine and we got a cuddle and that was lovely and he cried. I think they might have had to give him a little bit of oxygen. This bit's kind of blurry. And then shortly after, I delivered the placenta as well, which again I didn't feel. But the bad news was that I had torn quite badly. I think probably because I couldn't feel my pushing. So I had a 3rd degree tear, which meant if you have a 2nd or 1st degree tear, they can do the stitches here and there just in the room and you can stay with your baby. But because my tear was quite bad, I had to go into the surgery, which in a different room. So I got about half an hour with my baby to cuddle my baby, and then he was left with my husband while I went into surgery. And that was kind of daunting because you're wheeled into surgery and there's lots of people there. I think there was about 10 people, all doing different jobs. And then because I had already had the epidural, they used that for my pain relief for the stitches. So the lady came back in, the anaesthetist, she gave me more of the epidural because it does wear off quickly. And they test to see how much you can feel and to see how far it's spread. They have to be careful that it doesn't spread above your waist, otherwise it can affect your breathing. So that's what they're checking. And they use this really cold spray, which they spray at different points on your body to see how much you can feel. And then once she was happy that I had enough pain relief and I wasn't going to be able to feel it, the surgeon came and did my stitches. It took about 20 minutes, half an hour. I was probably in there for about half an hour before that while they were trying to get the pain relief sorted. And then after that, they cleaned me up and I was taken to there's a room where they keep an eye on you more. It's kind of like the high dependency unit. Just because after you have surgery, they have to keep an eye on you for a few hours. So I was taken there with my baby and my husband. Now, at my hospital in the UK, partners can stay overnight, but they're not given a bed. So there was a chair next to my bed, so my husband could have stayed the night in the chair, but at this point we were both exhausted. So I gave birth at 8:30, and I think by the time I was wheeled to that room, it was probably about 11:30, midnight. I wanted him to be rested, so I told him to go home so he could get some sleep. And then I was in that room with the baby for maybe a couple of hours, and after that they wheeled me into the normal maternity ward. And I was there for 2 nights. And I think the hardest part of that experience is that they don't really expect you to sleep. And you're exhausted, you've just had a baby, you're really tired. I've been up since 1:30 the previous night, and all the lights are on in that room. Outside there was, just outside the door where I was, there was the reception, so there was all the staff sort of chatting. I'm one of those people that needs quiet to sleep. So I could hear all the talking, I could hear the phones ringing, and then every hour or so, someone would come and check on you again, check your blood pressure, check that everything's okay, and you get prodded and poked. So even once I got to the maternity ward, but every time somebody wants a staff member to come, they press a button and it sets off an alarm. So Every half an hour or so there was a really loud alarm, and it would go on for quite a few minutes. Because it was Christmas, I was actually the only woman in the ward the first night, so at least that was good. But the second night there were 2 other women in there, and their babies were crying all night. So the babies kind of took turns. So my baby would go to sleep finally, and then someone else's baby would start crying. And I think maybe we had about an hour, maybe 2 hours in the night where there was no babies crying. So you kind of have to accept that you're not going to sleep. So I didn't sleep really at all for 3 nights, and I relied on having naps when my partner came to visit the next day. And because I've had surgery on my tear, I had to stay for 2 nights. I think if you have a C-section, you have to stay at least 2 nights as well. And then I was allowed to go the next day after we'd had all our checks. So they have to do checks on you. They need to make sure that you can go to the toilets, to be able to sort of move around. They check your baby for lots of different things, including their hearing. So there's certain checks you have to go through before they let you leave, and then you get to go home. But I was lucky. Last time we weren't allowed visitors because it was like a year after COVID. But this time I was visited by my parents, Jake's parents, and my son got to visit us at the hospital, which was really lovely, and meet his baby brother, and that was a beautiful moment. And look, what's that? Little bear. Doctor, there are some doctors here, yeah. Yeah. Just be very careful, don't stand on him, because he's very little, we have to be very gentle. Look. I think when he wakes up, he'll really like to play with that. So that's it really, that is the end of our birth story. I hope it was informative if you are pregnant and giving birth soon. Good luck, and I hope your birth goes well and you have healthy, beautiful babies.